Welcome to Playform Radio, a show where we talk about creative entrepreneurship. I'm Jennifer Chang, and I'm the CEO of Playform, a no-code AI platform for creators in the NFT space. I'm personally very excited today about today's topic because I've lived the digital nomad lifestyle myself in the past. I find that traveling often helps me find new inspiration, learn new things, and connect with awesome people. Today, I'm going to be talking to one of those awesome people I met on my own journey, Vikram Bharati, the CEO and founder of Draper Startup House, which provides co-living and co-working spaces for entrepreneurial digital nomads all over the world. Draper Startup House currently operates in 24 locations across 5 continents. Prior to starting the company, Vikram spent 2 years as a digital nomad himself after spending a decade in finance at companies like JP Morgan Chase. So please join me in welcoming my friend Vikram to Playform Radio. Hey, Vikram, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Jennifer.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us all the way from Singapore. Pretty awesome. It sounds like you've been around the world in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I've been traveling. I just got back from South America, and so the borders are open. People are traveling, which is great, and I think the world is returning to normal.
Like I told you, I was in Mexico last week, and I mean, digital nomads were everywhere. People have their laptops. People are working by the beach, at cafes. Every co-working space I went to is packed. Definitely the world has reopened. And so I thought it'd be a really great time to talk to you and about Draper Startup House. It's something that has played such a big role in my own travel and life. And it has been just a big part of how I built a community globally. I talk to our artists about it all the time. And so I wanted to invite you to talk about it directly. So just to start, can you tell people about Draper Startup House and what you do and just like the awesomeness that is?
Thanks, Jennifer. I always like talking to you because you inspire me. You make me feel good. All right. So what is Draper Startup House? Well, maybe we start with what is the mission of Draper Startup House. And our mission at the company is to help build 1 million businesses around the world, in our lifetime. And the reason for that is our thesis is that the world will be a much better place if more and more people take control of their destiny and create their own journeys in life. And so how we're going to achieve that is through building what we call Draper Startup House, which really is a network of physical communities, physical spaces all around the world. And we do 4 things with the company. The first thing is we bring people together in physical spaces. And so we operate or we partner with spaces that provide living spaces, workspaces, community spaces. So they come in all shapes and forms. And we currently have 25 of these spaces around the world. And our hope is to get to 50 spaces in the next couple of years. The second thing we do is we invest in companies. So we have our own venture capital fund, and we also have partners. And we find great opportunities and great entrepreneurs and great creators around the world through our community, and we invest in them directly, or we partner with other investors. The third thing we do is education. We have a sister company called Draper University, and through that we have dozens of programs where we help people become a bit more familiar with how to build a company or how to scale their company. And the fourth thing we do is services. So we have a sister company where we develop tech for companies. So we can build any tech stack for companies of all sizes. And we have around 150 developers in places like Vietnam and Philippines and the Ukraine, where the cost of development is low. And so we help our community with developing the technology. So these 4 things are the 4 pillars of the house. And collectively, our hope is that we build a massive global business platform ecosystem and try to create as many businesses as possible in the world.
Yeah. And, before we kind of jump into a little bit more, I think it'll also explain, it just could be kind of helpful to also explain Draper and the Draper Network. You've mentioned these sister companies, which are, the kind of really the Draper Network, which is I guess kind of a little difficult to explain because it's just so kind of massive and across so many different things. But do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the Draper business ecosystem is a very deep, wide, and old ecosystem that is scattered all around the world, and it originates from Tim Draper and his I suppose his parents, and it's I think 3-4 generations of venture capitalists who built a very global business platform. I think they were one of the first brands to really take venture capital global out of Silicon Valley into places like India and Australia and Europe. And so they've been sort of pioneers in the venture capital investment world. And so they've developed over the last 40 years networks of lots of different venture capital funds around the world, education institutions, media. There's a TV show, there's a reality show, there's books, and so essentially it's a very deep organization, and we became part of that organization about 2.5 years ago. Before that, we were a separate brand, a different brand, and Tim Draper really liked what we were doing, and so we joined forces with him, and which is great because in order for us to achieve our mission, we really need a very, very deep organization with lots of capabilities. And so now that we're part of this organization, we have access to 30, 40 different venture capital funds around the world. We have access to lots of students who graduated from different of the education programs, so scattered around the world. We're building lots of businesses. So the network is very, very deep. And as you know, Jen, brand and network is key to building a business. And so we're very happy to be part of this organization. And through that, we are now able to sort of like level up and really do things on a much larger scale than if we were trying to do it alone.
Yeah. So, the reason I wanted to talk to you on Playform Radio is because I think right now, especially with what's happening with NFTs, you have this creator economy that's been going on really since social media and YouTube. But I think right now, especially with the kind of the rise of Web3 and this new kind of way of thinking that we're coming out of the pandemic with as well, everyone is now an entrepreneur, especially creative people. Creative people have an opportunity to build businesses, whether it be small or large, just in a way that never existed before, right? There was always like a gatekeeper you had to go through as a creative person. Whereas those gatekeepers are coming down, and now there's like a DIY avenue as by kind of taking on some entrepreneurial risk and ability, that artists can really build their own business. And Playform, where our community's full of them. And one of the things I was thinking is, particularly just kind of knowing about the Draper Startup House network is artist residencies have always been a big part of how artists created. Artists have always traveled. I think in some way, I feel like artists are the best people to travel because they can go out, absorb a place, and like bring it back home and express it in new ways. And so, when you think about artist residencies, it used to be that you would go somewhere, a gallery or a studio would host you, and you would paint or draw or create some kind of exhibition. But in today's more entrepreneurial climate, I feel like there's just an opportunity to also for artists to leverage Draper Startup House to essentially build their own artist residency. What are some thoughts about this? How might artists want to think about building their own residency abroad or traveling to kind of create their own artistic creative experience?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think you've pointed out some very important topics or some very important developments in the world. And the first development, which is sort of unique in our lifetime, is that people all around the world can reach audiences without sort of middlemen or gatekeepers, which is a massive new development in our lifetime, which is going to unleash so much talent and creativity around the world. And we're seeing that directly because we have this global network of communities. We're seeing amazing talent in places like, let's say, Georgia, in Europe, Eastern Europe. We're seeing such talent in South America and in India. So globally, or Philippines, and we're engaging with this artist communities all around the world, and we're seeing such emerging talent who are essentially leveraging these new technologies and these new platforms to reach audiences, and to engage with potential customers. And this is a massive development. And we're engaging with communities. Let's say, as an example, in the Philippines, we recently did an event with the youngest NFT creator in the world. He's, I think, 6 years old or 7 years old, and he's reaching audiences all around the world. And I think that's like amazing. And so we're seeing such creativity come from countries which usually don't get a limelight. And especially you're stateside. You're probably in the Silicon Valley universe, and usually that world, we talk about artists and creatives sort of like in that universe. But I've noticed that the universe is much larger. And
actually, I would say that's been the interesting experience with Playform, right? Like every other company I've started to date, we've been so US centric. Like I've complained to you about this, like everything is just so US based, Silicon Valley oriented. But I have noticed the journey with Playform has been very global. Actually, it's a huge challenge because of time zones. But our users are coming from all over the world in a way that I've never seen with another software company prior to this. Because I think the really exciting thing is, the talent was always there, but now the talent is connecting. And they're able to, something like Playform, whether you live in India, Philippines, New Zealand, or the US, you all have access to the same software. You can all jump on our Discord and talk to the other users and, build community. And just this like accessibility around this has been so interesting, and to kind of see that the global community is coming together now in a way that, just didn't exist before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a great example is one of our artists in residence. Her name is Masha.
Do you have a artist in like a residency program?
We do. It's not officially in place in all our locations, but as each state wants to do this. So in the Philippines, we have an artist in residence program, and we get artists from all around the world come in and stay with us. And we have these programs in different spaces. And one of the companies that came out of that is a company called Marshallland, and she's great. I mean, her work is amazing, and we want to see how we can help her get her artwork around the world. But not only that, like we're also coming in touch with a lot of platforms. So like Playform is a great platform, and we're seeing developments of such platforms all around the world. One of the companies we're looking at is a company called Empty Spaces, and I think they're out of Taiwan or Korea, and a great platform. So I think the infrastructure is also developing, and the creativity and the artists are developing, and the business models are developing. And for me, I think the very interesting thing is the development of the business models, and the business models are developing as the infrastructure is developing and changing. And so it's a very exciting time. And the other point that you sort of highlighted, which I wanted to touch on, was, our mission of the company is to try to build 1 million businesses around the world. And so these 1 million businesses are not going to be, very Silicon Valley tech type of very scalable types of businesses. They're going to be small businesses. They're going to be small artists. And so I kind of see Draper Startup House as becoming, and it's sort of naturally becoming sort of like the new International Chamber of Commerce, which is very exciting, because if you think about the International Chamber of Commerce, it's like this 150-year-old organization. It's part of the United Nations. It's almost sort of like a political organization. It's men in suits trying to do business like the old school way, which is all great. But I think there's an opportunity for like a new International Chamber of Commerce, which is really embracing all those new changes and the new minds and the new attitudes of this new world, and creating this Chamber of Commerce where people can trade ideas and can trade businesses all around the world, whether they're digital or physical. And so I think the opportunity in the world is to create this new International Chamber of Commerce that can actually help unleash creative talent all around the world.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, like I find it particularly interesting when I talk to artists about travel. I think there's my, we went to the same MBA program. There's our MBA friends who travel and, they stay at nice hotels and have a great time and come home. But when you talk to artists about travel, they go somewhere, they experience it, and then they express it. They can share beyond photos. They can share, really what they experienced and translate in such new ways. And that was the other reason I was inspired to do this episode, because I want to encourage artists to travel, because I think when artists travel, we all benefit in this like really beautiful way, which is like the cool thing about Draper Startup House. And, just the fact that you're able to go there, connect with the community, and like really take that and create something out of that experience. So one more thing, just because, we're talking about new business models. I also know you're following crypto, because I've met so many crypto traders, entrepreneurs at the Draper Startup House locations I've been to. So, what are your thoughts about NFTs? Kind of, just as someone who's exposed to so many different businesses out there.
Yeah. So I think you've highlighted like one very interesting point, which is like the importance of travel for artists and creativity. And I recently heard a saying which I thought was very interesting, which is like the currency of the future is creativity and knowledge, and which is very powerful, because the idea of knowledge is the fact that there's many different ways to gain knowledge. You can go to formal schools, or you could just learn things on YouTube, or you can learn through traveling around the world. And I think the knowledge set that you get as you're traveling around the world is a very different knowledge set, which is like direct experience in new cultures and new people, and the excitement of new locations. So I think that knowledge set helps with the creativity, and I see that myself as I'm traveling around the world. And I just came from Brazil, and I went to Campo Grande, which is a small town outside of Sao Paulo, and what I learned being there, I felt like I'm richer and deeper because of that knowledge set. And so that traveling around the world for artists, I think, is very important. And we're seeing that artists who travel around the world generally tend to have a very unique perspective in their artwork or their creativity. So that's sort of like one point that I wanted to highlight. And then to your question about what do I think about like these new business models and NFTs and the whole new I guess new world of decentralized ownership. I think it's very exciting. I'm not an expert. I think, and you're probably an expert in this topic because of the work you do. I'm not an expert.
People have made me an expert because, like, yeah, I got in like 2 months or 3 months earlier than anyone else.
Right. So my perspective on this is very limited, and I need to learn more. But what I'm seeing superficially, at least from an outsider's perspective, as I look into our community as they're developing all of these creative ideas, is that it's certainly very exciting. And I think you look at the technology set that's enabling this new business model of ownership on the internet, and the mechanisms that allow the ownership of ideas on the internet, and the ability for people to exchange that ownership through a very decentralized form of currency. I think it's certainly a massive shift in the new wave of technology, which is going to just unleash lots of other things. And so I think the idea of NFTs are certainly very, very exciting. And we're just seeing our communities all around the world shift to this new model of ownership on the internet. And so I think this is just the beginning, whether it's NFTs, who knows in 5 years from now what things will emerge out of all the different things that are happening in the space. And I think this is a beginning of a very exciting new decade of technology, which is going to enable people to really own and trade and exchange value on the internet.
I mean, I'm like just, thinking about it right now. I had a really interesting meeting today, earlier today with another Web3 company. We're partnering. We're not like partnering, but we're all working with the same creator. And what I've started to realize is like the blockchain is like a new Silk Road. It's the infrastructure on which we can trade and sell and build. Like even talking to this other Web3 company, it was like, all right, we're going to build on Ethereum ERC 721. They're like, okay, great, we can do that too. And I realized, oh my God, I didn't have to have an engineer on this call. We didn't need to talk about APIs. We didn't need to figure out how to build protocols so we can speak to each other. All of that's already built. It's kind of like that road always, the Silk Road existed so that people can travel down that path. And they knew if they were on that path, they would run into other traders. And they would be able to exchange goods and services because everyone knew this is the road that you take from here to there. And kind of like Draper Startup House, right? Like you guys build these little nodes all over that kind of pathway. I think particularly you guys have kind of figured out a blockchain road yourself. You guys are kind of everywhere blockchain is. And it's somewhere that people can come and they know they can trade. They know they can trade in information and network and all of that. And so I do think we're just at the cusp of something just so, like, to your point, it's just so early. I don't think a lot of people see it. But, building on this international chamber of commerce, like these are all things that enable businesses, the blockchain, NFTs. And I think that's why we're just seeing such an explosion of entrepreneurship right now, because we can, like, whereas we couldn't before.
Yeah, I think in our lifetime, certainly, I think we're going to see a massive shift in the way organizations are managed. I think we're going to see a lot more small companies of 1, 2, 3 people, or maybe just one person. I guess like in the industrial age, our parents' time, certainly it was all massive organizations who needed the scale for manufacturing, etc. But I think as technology evolves, I think there's going to be, say, if there's 8 billion people in the world, there's potentially going to be 8 billion different ways people are going to make a living, hopefully. And so I think this is a massive shift because I'll give you an example of like a place like India that has 1.4 billion people, and we're seeing emergence of companies who are 1, 2 people organizations who are living in Goa, which is like the Cancun of India.
Yep,
and right. And they're musicians who are building a no-code platform for anyone to be able to create their own music for their podcasts or for their videos, and then own that and have a way to exchange that and trade that with other people. And we're seeing these types of companies come out of places like Goa, and we're seeing, like, in the crypto space, a place like India, which has always been an adapter of technology, and we haven't seen them being sort of like the leaders in technology. Like I guess chains like Polygon are coming out of India, and these are now becoming universally adapted. And so this is just the beginning of countries like India or large companies where have been sort of in the background come to the foreground and creating new things. And I think this is really, really exciting, because if a place like India can do it, then certainly a lot of other countries can be sort of emerging as talent comes to the top, and you can live in Goa and create awesome companies. And I think, to your point of like digital nomadism, I think digital nomadism is such a broad term, but essentially in the heart of it, it's self-sovereignty, right? And it's that the future currency of the world is creativity and knowledge. And for that, you don't need to be part of a mega organization. You can just have a laptop and an internet connection, live in Goa, and create awesome code that can be adopted by millions of people around the world.
Yeah, and actually, like for the artists, I don't know if you're aware of this, Vikram, but actually the $69 million artwork that sold last year, that was kind of like the thing that kicked off the NFT movement. But the buyer, the collector of that piece, Metapurse, it's two dudes out of Chennai. It's Indian guys.
Mhm.
The art collector is changing as well. Like before, I think for a lot of artists, it's like, oh, I have to be in New York and London, right? That's where the collectors are. That's where the prestigious galleries are. But now with NFTs, you're also seeing, you're seeing democratization on the create side, but you're also seeing democratization on the buy side. Like that $69 million Beeple piece was being fought over by, guys who grew up in India against a guy in Hong Kong. There was no New York or London involved in any of it. There was no like old, crazy railroad money involved in any of it. And I find that really exciting. Like the face of the collector, the face of the artist, this is all changing. Which also means for artists, you have a global market now. You can go to Goa and sell art. You don't have to be in New York or London. There's markets everywhere now. And I think that's another thing to just, for artists to think about as they think about travel. It's not necessarily even just about creating, but it's also an opportunity to sell.
Yeah, it's interesting when I talk to my friends who are gamers, and I'm not a gamer, so I don't have that unique perspective as they do. But it's interesting to hear from them that the idea of ownership of digital products, which let's say today's term is NFT, or we call them the metaverse. But I think these ideas and these things existed a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back to Nintendo, or you playing, games on the Xbox, and buying and trading swords on,
But the key difference, I think, is like you used to get the sword in the game and you could brag to everyone in the game, like, look, I got the sword, I'm better than you in the game.
Yeah.
But then you couldn't take it out of the game.
And I think that's the amazing development. So the ideas like these things have existed a long time, but I think the evolution is now, because technology allows it. There's a new way to really commercialize that and make it a lot more universal, and not just for gamers, but it could be anything. It could be art. It could be it could be it could be anything. It could be photos. It could be anything.
Membership, like fashion is going, into NFTs. Like I've been hearing a lot about that. I think it's just infinite. So I want to also just touch on travel, because you are the travel expert, and I'm sure everyone who's listening right now, I'm sure you've been 2 years stuck at home, you're itching to travel. Just coming out of the pandemic, that really affected travel. What do you think post-pandemic travel will look like? What are kind of some of your thoughts? I'm sure you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't really know how it's going to evolve, because I don't think anyone really knows. But as I start to travel now, after 2 years of being stuck in Singapore, the first time I went out of the country after the pandemic, or like during the pandemic, was I went to Europe for Christmas in December of last year. And that travel was a bit difficult because I was traveling with kids, etc. But I just went, around the world to Latin America and the US, and came back to Singapore. And what I'm seeing is people are starting to travel, whether it's because of necessity or because they're just itching to get out. But people are starting to move around, and travel is such an important part of the world GDP. So I don't see travel like sort of stopping or coming to an end. I think, in fact, I think all indications show that there's going to be a resurgence and a boom in travel, because I think it's just human nature. It's ingrained in our DNA to be nomads and travel the world and look for new pastures. I think it's millions of years of that DNA in our cells is not going to end anytime soon. So I think genetically, we're just, as humans, always itching to travel to new cultures and explore. So I think there's going to be a huge resurgence. I think digital nomadism as a way of life is only going to grow and grow and grow, because it's innate in human nature. I think the idea of remote work which is now possible because of new
We proved out
technologies.
remote work. Yeah. Like when I was down in Mexico, I noticed like so many people from Canada and America down there, particularly people from Canada and the Pacific Northwest, because it's so cold and they're all working from home anyways. They were like, why would I work from home with the heater on when I can just get on a plane and work from Mexico and be in the
Yeah.
same time zone?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think time zone is probably going to be a key sort of. I think there's going to be clusters of people all around the world based on this time zone. But I'm very bullish on the future of travel and the future of business travel, the future of travel as a way of life, and the future of just more independence and freedom of families. And what's even more exciting is like I look, because we do a lot of business in India. What I'm seeing is in countries where generally women couldn't really participate in the workforce because they were raising children and cultural norms required them to be at home, etc. But now I'm seeing that a lot of women are now participating in the workforce, even if they're doing a couple hours a day here and there because they can do it remotely. And I think the fact that more and more women around the world, especially in cultures where it's not the norm, start participating in the labor force around the world, then it's only going to be good for the world, and that in itself,
New
I think, is
voices, new
massive.
opinions, new consumers, new ways of thinking. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the remote work aspect of it is going to really definitely change travel. Digital nomads. I also just think in general, people, especially with these pandemic restrictions, I think most of them will go away. But if someone can stick around, then it makes more sense to travel for a longer period of time, right? You're not going to just go for a weekend and come home, but maybe you stay for 2 weeks because you can work remote. And that's going to really change how you might think about travel because you're staying longer than you might have before.
Yeah, and Jen, there's another another development that we're seeing at Draper Startup House, which I think is massive. It's probably one of the biggest developments in this discussion that we're having, which is we're seeing lots of governments around the world realizing that the automation is going to be it's here, it's real. A lot of jobs are going to be automated away. It's just going to happen whether they like it or not. And so they're also realizing that, especially smaller countries, they're realizing that the future currency of the world is creativity and knowledge. And so a lot of countries are now embracing the idea that they need human capital to come to their countries. And so the idea of like digital nomad visas, and sort of embracing this nomadism that's just going to happen, instead of shunning it away and closing out their borders, they're literally opening up their borders and giving incentives to people to come into their country to come and work, which is going to be great for tourism. It's going to be great for the small businesses, but also, more importantly, it's going to be great for their economies because people of different skill sets and knowledge base are going to come to the countries and hopefully share that with the country. So we're seeing, we recently had an international business conference with Bhutan, and we suggested to Bhutan that you should open up your country to digital nomads and build the infrastructure and allow them to come and work in your country. And places like that are really starting to think about a country like Bhutan that has no natural resources. It's a small country with a very small population. How are they going to economically develop their country? It's not going to be through setting up factories, right? Because it's going to be India and China that are going to develop those factories. So it's going to be intellectual property and human resources. And so these small countries around the world, whether they're in Eastern Europe, whether they're in Latin America or Central America or the Caribbean or in Indonesia, all of these governments are now realizing the importance of really embracing digital nomadism and creating rules and regulations to allow people to really move around. I think that development is only going to become more and more strong in our lifetime. and that's going to be a huge catalyst for great things to come.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's a brilliant move, right? Like, like bringing that talent in. Once they're there, they're going to buy a sandwich. When they're at the co-working space working, at the cafe, they're going to buy a cappuccino or tea or whatever you sell. I mean, this is all revenue for your people, as well as, like you said, that mixing of people. Like, I mean, I've definitely experienced that traveling through around the world, right? Like, I show up in a country, people show up, we start talking, and we just start trading information in a way that, like, I learned something, but I'm also leaving something behind, which is always beautiful. Can you tell us a few of the countries that are making these digital nomad visas available so that people who might be interested in looking into them can do some research?
Yeah, so I don't have a full list, but some of the countries that I've seen have these discussions are, so in Asia, I think Thailand has been discussing this for a while, though I think it's very bureaucratic, and I don't know when it's going to happen. Indonesia certainly is talking about this and have been discussing this for a while. I think Vietnam has been, they're discussing this. So in Southeast Asia, those are the countries that I've seen where there's a lot of discussions. Then in Latin America, Colombia has recently launched a digital nomad visa. I think Brazil is looking at it. In the Bahamas and in Central America, a lot of discussions with like Barbados and the smaller islands in that region, who have programs like Come Work in the Jungle, lots of different marketing schemes. But this is all positive. And then in Europe, we're seeing places like clearly like Portugal with like Madeira Islands. They're doing a lot of digital nomadism related incentives and programs. In Eastern Europe, we're seeing places like Georgia, which is making a bit of a tax haven for for digital assets. So lots of these countries. Africa, I'm not quite sure what's happening in Africa. I haven't quite looked into it, but I think certainly a lot of African countries are going to have to embrace this new wave of change in the world. But yeah, all of these countries are the ones that I'm aware of. But I know the list is a lot longer. I'm sure there's resources online where you can find these. But this is a trend that certainly is a new development compared to, say, 5 years ago, where you never had these types of countries talk about this.
Yeah, and I think the first world really needs to wake up on this as well. Like, the big countries like the US really need to kind of have some fear about this. Like, Silicon Valley can go work in the Bahamas, right? Like, you gotta really start building in some incentives and, start building some housing so we don't have to all leave. And, I think a lot that, there's a lot of reasons why this is happening. And, I think it's to the benefit of anyone who has that flexibility. Like you said, anyone who has that creativity and knowledge, that's your currency that gives you access to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point. And look, Silicon Valley is always going to be Silicon Valley because there's just this massive, large amounts of people and all in a small area. So I think it creates a lot of natural dynamics that a hub creates. So I'm not sure if that's going away anytime soon, but we're certainly seeing that Silicon Valley is now in the cloud. And we're seeing that because I sit here in Singapore, we have a venture capital fund. We're investing in early stage ideas all around the world. And we're investing in Colombia, we're investing in Brazil, we're investing in India, we're investing in all around Europe, and we're seeing great ideas and talent and people and businesses all around the world. And this is a distributed team of me and two other people who are sort of all around the world. And so Silicon Valley is in the cloud, and especially with the Draper Network, we're collaborating with all of these like pools of capital all around the world, having discussions on Slack and investing digitally through Zoom, and so I think Silicon Valley is in the cloud, and it's only going to become more so. And so, I mean, I think ultimately, if creativity and knowledge is the currency of the future, and the access to capital is in the cloud, then I think it's a very exciting world we're going to see in the next decade.
I know it's going to be a lot of fun. Just to kind of dive into a little bit of the travel, like, you've been a digital nomad yourself. You've spent a lot of time on the road. You know this pretty well. So, I mean, for anyone who's kind of like thinking, oh, now's the time I want to start this because, just for all the reasons we talked about. What are some of your tips and your advice for people who want to start this kind of digital nomad lifestyle?
Yeah, I think sorry, Jen, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it depends on your level of adventure and your level of risk that you perceive. But if you're stateside and you haven't left the country, there's easy ways to be a digital nomad within the United States. I mean, and I think you're seeing this, like if you're from I don't know, Tampa, Florida, and you want to see the world. Like the U.S. itself is such a massive country, and there's so many things to see and cultures within the United States. So I think just traveling within the United States, which I think is happening a lot, right? Like a lot of digital nomadism happening within the United States, where people are saying, "Why do I have to live in a big city?" And so moving to smaller places. So that's one great way to start, certainly. Or if you're in Europe, traveling within Europe is a great way to start. Or if you want to adventure out to Mexico, which I think is an awesome place, that's an easy, easy flight. So I think starting small and taking like little steps to get out of the comfort zone, I think is probably a great starting point. Or there's lots of countries around the world which are on the other side of the world, but are modern and probably have similar lifestyles. So, for instance, if you want to explore Asia, you may not want to dive directly into Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, but you could come to Singapore, which is a modern country, first world country, and it could be a good stepping stone to
English.
people speak English, exactly. So there's probably some cultural similarities, but I think Europe is a great place too because and just travel just has become a lot easier.
It's gotten so much easier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like, I was joking with a bunch of people I met through Draper Startup House that I'm an analog nomad because I did this before the smartphone. Like it used to be a lot harder.
Yeah, it used to be a lot harder, and I think you and I are probably similar in the sense that we like adventure, and we probably naturally seek out places that are off the beaten path. Or places that
I would say it's less about adventure, and I just really like meeting people. I that's what I've really learned about myself from traveling. I love people, and if you go off the beaten path, you meet like different people that you wouldn't have ever met, that you won't see on television, that you won't see in documentaries, and that's always been like the fun part, to just go off the beaten path and find the things that no one else has been finding.
Yeah, that's true. And no, one thing you learn from traveling, especially I think you and I, when we travel to countries that are off the beaten path and maybe be perceived as like a risk, conflict areas, is that, you realize the world is awesome and great, but you also realize the world is actually also very, the world is also a dark place. It's not all great. And I think it's great to kind of discover the dark side of the world because it's important. It shapes your perspective on the bright side of the world. I mean, for instance, I think we've talked about this in the past. We used to have a Draper Startup House in Yangon in Myanmar, and we had to shut it down because when the pandemic started, there was a coup, and the military took over the country, and they were extremely draconian, dictatorial. So our space, the military with guns blazing would come in the middle of the night, look at our employees. They would check their phones. If there was any posts on social media, that was pro or anti the military, literally they would just drag them to jail and no one would see them. and we were seeing such brutality of people just being slaughtered on the streets, such brutality. And that's such a dark side of the world, and that is part of the world. That is a real reality, and we're seeing this happen in Ukraine. We're seeing this happen like in conflict zones all across Africa. This is a reality. This is happening every single day, and I think part of the adventure is to actually see the stuff in real life, because I have so much more, I suppose, appreciation for living in a country that is stable and there's none of these conflicts. And
Yeah.
I think that part of travel we always try to ignore, and we always try to see the beautiful beaches and the coconuts, but the reality is I think seeing the dark side of the world is just as equally important.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I've been to the Yangon location before it closed. And when Myanmar went down, I had, people that I had met in Myanmar in my Facebook feed, letting me know what was actually happening. I feel like a lot of this travel, while yes, it also shows you the dark side of the world, it also helps you get to truth. I think there's a lot of distrust of media and, kind of how information is filtered lately. And for me, especially during that Myanmar situation, I felt like, well, I'm getting information from the people now. I'm not just relying on the media, who was barely covering it, right? Like the US media barely talked about Myanmar. Being in Singapore, I'm sure it was still, it was much more, top of the headlines. But here we saw nothing. But that being said, on my Facebook, I had Burmese friends posting because I met them at Draper Startup House. And that gave me kind of that gave me like direct information about the dark things that were happening in the world, in a way that allowed me to have empathy, allowed me to explain it to others around me. Especially since it wasn't in the headlines, it wasn't making the headlines here, which was really disappointing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's the more networks you have around the world, the more sources of truth you can have. And we know, whether it's, the well-known social media platforms or mainstream media. I mean, certainly there's disinformation, and there is an agenda that every platform has. And so you never really know. And I think for instance, we're doing things in Turkey, in Istanbul, and Turkey is going through a really, really interesting time because of high inflation and etc. But we're getting the truth from from our colleagues in Turkey, which is awesome. And we're doing things in Eastern Europe, so we're getting like information on what's happening in Ukraine directly from our networks in Kiev. And so I think you're right. Like the more friends and people and colleagues and networks you have within those countries, the more truth you get, which gives you a lot more, I think, more real perspective on what's happening in the world. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
All right. So last question. So, you guys have locations now. You said 25 locations. I thought it was 24, but I guess you guys added one. What DHS locations would you recommend for artists? Yeah, you mentioned like the residency in the Philippines, and, give us the inside scoop. Where should they go?
Yeah. So there's 3 places I'd really recommend for artists. One is definitely check out Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I think there's a very, very rich creative and scene and ecosystem in Buenos Aires. Secondly, I think Brazil is certainly a place that you should check out. Our space there is not up and running yet, but it will be in a couple of months.
Where in Brazil?
So it's in a place called Campo Grande, which is sort of like the bread basket of Brazil. So, but there's a awesome creative community in Campo Grande. In Asia, I would say definitely check out Vietnam. I think that's a very creative place. I think you should definitely check out India. In Da Nang.
Da Nang? Oh yeah, that sounds like fun. Da Nang is by the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vietnam. I would agree. Vietnam is like happening right now. There's something there. Like it's just like it's frenetic. Like I can feel the energy.
Yeah. I think Portugal is it's a great place. Like Lisbon is a very creative city. I mean, I think India doesn't get enough attention in this sphere, but I think India is an extremely creative place, and it's great for
Yeah.
for uh, for creativity. So I would say definitely check out India. Um, there's always Bali, which is great. So yeah, I think each country has its unique flavor.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I've been to DHS in Bali, great location. Just like, I mean, if you want somewhere to like draw and be inspired, that's the spot. You can just kind of sit on that beautiful lawn forever and just sketch rice fields. And yeah, I do agree. I think I think we saw China really evolve in the last couple decades, and I feel like the energy in India is feeling very much like when I first went to China. Like there's so many young people there. That young energy, I just don't think I've seen it anywhere else in the world, like to that extreme than what you can find in India.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I hope this inspired some artists to pack up their backpacks and go hit the road. Maybe go apply for a Draper Startup House residency so that they can, kind of further explore their art practice somewhere else and get inspired. Thank you so much for your time. And anyone who wants more information can go to draperstartuphouse.com and learn more about the different locations and where you can travel and stay. So thanks everyone, and thank you Vikram for joining us today.
Awesome. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks, Jennifer, for having me.
All right, bye.
Okay, bye.